marital property and how it is oftentimes hidden in divorces. And so this is important for folks that might have a really robust marital estate. Maybe one of the parties owns a business, or maybe both parties own businesses. Maybe one party or both parties have a lot of assets that have been obtained over the course of the marriage. And so, in these instances, usually we do see the kind of bad conduct that is described as either hiding or moving around marital assets. And there's a number of reasons for it. And we'll discuss that here very, very shortly. Just to give you a very brief roadmap, we'll talk a little bit about what exactly hiding assets is. We'll provide a few examples. And then we'll talk about, provide some red flags on how to identify it, and then maybe how to get it addressed. Okay. If you are going through a divorce, or you anticipate going through a divorce, or you've already kind of noticed some red flags in your relationship regarding the movement of assets or the non disclosure of other assets. So, hiding marital assets in Georgia divorce is today's topic. And we'll talk a little bit about how a divorce isn't just emotional. There is also the financial part of it. Okay. So, you guys have been married maybe for a few years or for some decades. And so, more than likely, you have commingled your finances. Your lives are really tied together. And so, in unwinding that contract, you have to split up all of these assets, which can be a little challenging. And so sometimes what we do is we get a spouse that is less than fair. We know that Georgia, of course, is an equitable division state. So this is not a community property state. So when the court goes to divide the property, it is divided up fairly. And so occasionally one spouse will try to take more than their fair share. And so we'll talk a little bit about what happens in those instances and again, how to recognize it. So, hidden assets can be again, a real simple definition: money or property, okay, that one party, one spouse elects not to disclose. All right. And so that is essentially at its core what the definition of hiding assets looks like. And so, just a few examples. We have spouses that are going through divorce that you may have one spouse that has secret bank accounts. Okay. And that can be domestic, it can be offshore accounts, and it can be an investment account, checking account, savings. But they are secret. They are kind of siphoning money from the marital estate in a very clandestine way. And it's very, very intentional. There can be undisclosed income, right? So one party might be getting a secret income, maybe from another business that the other spouse wasn't aware of, or maybe it can be coming in from the sale of things like cryptocurrency, or maybe they're getting revenue from things like investment properties. Okay. And so those are ways, and those are examples of hidden assets. And then there's just the run-of-the-mill transferring of money, right? So sometimes one spouse will just transfer money from one account that might have been a shared account, or it might have been something like a retirement account, okay, to another, with the intent, again, of not disclosing what the true value of the account is to the other spouse, okay. So one thing I do want you to be mindful of, and this is one of the reasons why this topic is so important: if the court is not aware of that asset, then it's impossible to equitably divide it. And so when that asset is not disclosed, what can happen, and what oftentimes happen in these situations, is that basically one of the spouses gets shortchanged. And so you don't want to be that spouse on the receiving end. I've seen situations where folks, kind of have been out hundreds of thousands of dollars simply because they weren't aware of maybe some secret investment account or some secret retirement account that absolutely was might have been acquired or began during the course of the marriage and is part of the marital estate. However, it was not disclosed. Okay. And if you're going through divorce, at the beginning, at the outset of the divorce, you're looking at domestic relations financial affidavits that are essentially supposed to be submitted by the parties. And in those affidavits, you are disclosing what your assets are as well as your liabilities, right? And so in these instances, we have folks who elect not to disclose all of their assets again because they don't want to be part of that pie that gets divided at the end of the litigation. Now, let's talk briefly about why spouses hide assets, and this for all of the human relations reasons that you can imagine, right? So one of them is just as you see sometimes on a playground, kids just don't want to split the whole pie, right? Or they'd rather have and keep more of the pie to themselves. It's very selfish motivation. They just don't want to split or part with money that they feel like either they have earned or is unearned on the side of the opposing side or the other spouse. One other reason is people sometimes just want to reduce alimony. And so they feel like if they can diminish the marital estate, this is one way of ensuring that when it comes to being divided, equitably divided, that the pie is significantly smaller, and because it's significantly smaller, there's less to be divided. Okay, and if there's less to be divided, then again, the person who is engaged in this conduct can usually keep a larger share, a larger portion of the pie. Okay. Another reason is when this happens in our situations where one spouse, one of the very very popular words in pop culture right now is a narcissist. One spouse just wants to control the outcome. They just want to manipulate the outcome, right? And so they do this in order to basically keep their thumb on the litigation and really wag their finger at the court as well as their soon to be ex spouse. And then finally, some people do it just for a pure retaliation. Okay. Maybe there was infidelity involved in the demise of the relationship, or maybe they just feel like they put in more energy into the relationship than the opposing side, and as a result, they're entitled to a bigger chunk or a bigger piece of the pie at the end of the marriage, right? And so those are the big reasons that we see people engage in this type of conduct. I will also add that is sometimes it's a a combination of two or three things might be the reason behind engaging in the conduct as well. So it's conduct that we see often, especially when again there are a lot of assets at stake, and then parties, sometimes both parties will engage in it. Usually it's one party that's engaged in it more so than another. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how this impacts equitable division, and I addressed that a little bit earlier. One way this impacts equitable division is it basically makes the dividing of the assets unfair. Okay, so it is unfair, and that means that one party does get shortchanged. Okay, and so as I mentioned earlier, a court can only divide what it knows about. All right, so keep that in mind. A court can only divide what it is aware of, made aware of, and that's usually going to happen through those early disclosures of the DERFA, called a domestic relations financial affidavit, with the acronym DERFA, or other accounts that might have been disclosed in interrogatories or in a request for production of documents. Sometimes that's where we, can get to some of these other secret accounts or third party accounts that, the spouse or the party that we're representing was not really aware of, right? And so it's important that, these accounts or these assets bubble up to the surface somehow. And sometimes the impetus for that is going to be your counsel, right? Your attorney is going to be the party, or your law firm, the party that is pursuing this. And so hidden assets, again, it's a way for your client, or for the opposing side, to be shortchanged. All right. So let's talk about how these assets are hidden as we move along. One of the ways, the top ways that they are hidden, is going to be just through good old fashioned under reporting. Okay, and so what I mean by that is sometimes we see folks that have cash businesses. It's very difficult to keep track of how much money is coming in, how much is going out, and so many instances it's easy for those folks to hide assets, or I should say easier, right? In these instances, again, I'll talk to you about some professionals that we will have to get involved if it, looks like it's going to be a case of hide the ball, all right? The other thing is going to be just delayed payments. So regarding businesses, sometimes, in the ordinary course of business, they would take payments. However, they might make deals with certain clients or vendors to delay payments till until after the divorce is finalized. And that's a way, again, of maybe devaluing the business, again, diminishing the marital estate, in order to again diminish the or make basically make the equitable division a lot less than what it would have been had those numbers been more robust. Okay, the other way that the other method of hiding assets is going to be transferring money. Okay, and so that can happen, does happen routinely. Folks will transfer money to friends, or they'll transfer money to family members. Okay. And sometimes this can be in the form of a fake loan. All right. So, one spouse might loan their brother $50,000, right, for services rendered, right, or for an installment loan. Doesn't matter what the conditions are, but that the fake loans to friends and family members is a big one. And then again, we talked a little bit about having businesses. It's a manipulation and valuation and evaluations of businesses. You can hide profits, right? That's one way that assets are usually hidden. Is there's basically profits that are coming in. However, you might move those profits to a secret account, or somehow or other you may manipulate the numbers so it looks like that the business is earning less than it's actually earning, or taking on fake expenses. All right, so taking on these expenses, again, that's going to impact the valuation numbers, okay, of that business. And so, the if the business looks like it is not doing as well as it could be doing, then when you go to again equitably divide things, including the business, that number is going to look lower than what it should look, because the actual profits are not being reported. They're not being disclosed. All right. Another way, and this is more novel now, is using crypto. Okay. Of course, they are now trying to regulate cryptocurrency. However, there's a lot of that sector that's still, deregulated. Okay. And so tracking the cryptocurrency that's being moved from coin to coin, perhaps, is going to be, a challenge. And so hurdles like that can pose problems for counsel that are trying to keep track of money that might be on the move. So, again, having an experienced attorney or law firm that's going to be able to make sure that these things aren't happening in your case is going to be paramount. And then, lastly, buying valuable items, things like artwork or jewelry or some kind of collectibles. We have clients that have, vintage cars, or exotic jewelry, or even making other investments. They take this money and park it in one of these assets, again with the intent of diminishing the marital estate. And what they may do is they might diminish the value or undersell the value of the actual asset that was acquired, again, with the intent of doing just what we discussed, devaluing the estate so that at division of the marital property, it's not as much money or as many assets that are in the middle of the table that need to be divided. And so again, it's manipulation in order to keep a greater share of the pie at the conclusion of the divorce. All right. So here are some red flags if you are going through divorce and you're thinking about, the opposing side might be hiding assets. Here are a few red flags you want to take a look for. All right. One is going to be a sudden drop in income. And sometimes we oftentimes see this in cases where one party is the non custodial parent, might be on the hook for child support. Sometimes they will all of a sudden be underemployed, right? And that sometimes happens because of if you the court obviously uses your income to determine what they take the combined adjusted gross income of both parents. We're not talking about child support, but I'm using it as an example to determine what the non-custodial parent's child support obligation is going to be. All right. And it's the same in a divorce, right? So if in a divorce, one party has a sudden drop in income, then if you're going to be on the hook for alimony or spousal support, that number might look a little different than if you were actually reporting your full income. Okay. So that's something to take a look for is a sudden drop in income. Another is missing documents, right? So if you have documents that you guys, kind of keep around the house that might be related to a retirement or investment properties, some stuff goes into a safe or might go into some kind of a deposit box, and all of a sudden those documents come up missing, then that might be a red flag that your spouse or the opposing side is trying to kind of maybe move some things around. And so your spidey sense should go off if that is your situation. And then if you're, kind of monitoring your accounts and you just see some unusual traffic, right, on your in your accounts, money is being moved to other accounts you don't recognize, or things are being zailed out, or you're watching your account numbers just kind of be diminished over time. That is a red flag. You do want to monitor that, because that can be one way that one spouse begins hiding and moving assets. And usually we'll see this type of secretive behavior when one party is under the impression that the relationship might be coming to a close. So sometimes people will begin engaging in this conduct years out, right, before the actual divorce is filed, with the understanding that they are trying to move assets around. So, something to kind of monitor. You want to keep your eye out. Again, you don't ever want to be in a marriage and be distrustful of your partner, but you do want to be wise. You do want to be smart and just look for red flags. Okay, and those are big red flags. or if there are accounts that you are not aware of or accounts you don't know about that might be surfacing or popping up, or you're finding, statements for that couldn't be a red flag that money is being siphoned from the marital estate into different accounts. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about that very briefly in a few moments. It's important to get the right kind of counsel involved in these type of cases if this is your situation. So let's talk about how they're found. Right, these assets, hidden assets, are frequently found. Usually, they're going to be found, using bank statements. Okay, as well as tax returns, or sometimes what we do is we will subpoena these records or statements, especially if the other spouse is not relinquishing them, or if we have requested them through discovery and they are not compliant, then we will have to subpoena them directly from the bank, right? Or from some kind of an investment firm. Okay. And so that's one of the reasons why having aggressive counsel is important, because they won't take things at surface value, right? They will do their own independent investigation. And if they find something problematic, then they will continue to press until they get the information that they are seeking. So, subpoenas are a great tool. And then depositions, right? So, we're looking at, we depose, let's say we subpoena some records, we get some bank records, we don't understand them. We depose the other spouse. We start asking questions, we start digging, doing a deep dive into the records and what's going on with these other accounts that were not disclosed, right? And usually we will unearth hidden assets. And this happened in a number of divorces that we've worked, that one spouse is engaged in hiding assets. And so, especially if there is a business involved, we do see a lot of the hiding of assets. So, what we like to do is, if we have one of these high asset cases, and sometimes, again, if you have a high asset divorce, again, getting the right attorney, getting the right counsel is going to be important, because they need to be familiar with these types of divorces and how to work these types of cases. Because not everybody is, right? So sometimes you hire professionals like a forensic accountant. Sometimes you hire financial experts, okay? And so those are sometimes become very necessary to do the proper investigation. Your attorney is not an accountant, right? Unless they have a degree in accounting. And even if they had a degree in accounting, they may not be a forensic accountant, right? Forensic accountants go looking, right? They are like police detectives. They go looking for things that are awry in the numbers, all right? And so if your attorney is not really familiar with working with those type professionals, or doing these types of investigations, or even familiar with working a case like a high asset divorce, then you might come out hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I've seen people possibly lose out on $500,000, simply because they either had the wrong counsel, or they just took some really, really, really bad advice. Okay. So what you want to do is you definitely want to get a law firm that is familiar with these types of cases. Okay. All right. So really quickly, as we kind of wrap some things up, what are the risks of not hiring or retaining counsel in a case where there are a lot of assets to divide? Well, I'm glad that you asked. One of them is you just miss out on hidden assets, right? And so, as we kind of just discussed, if you miss these assets, and then later on you discover them, you're going to have to try to reopen litigation, right? And so what that ends up doing is, one, whatever you paid initially, because sometimes people will try to cut corners, right? And see if they can get value or something undervalued, and maybe bring on an attorney that is less than experienced in these type of situations. It goes badly. Now you have to reopen litigation. Now you're going to pay twice the amount that you paid, because you have to bring on an attorney that is well versed in this area, and it's probably going to cost you. Okay. Not only that, it's going to be double the time. So whatever time, however many years it took to get through the first case, now we're litigating it a second time, and it's probably going to take just as much time. Okay. And so remember, at the beginning of this video, I've mentioned measure twice, all right, cut once. All right. So you want to make sure that you have the right people in place that are advocating for you. The other thing that can happen is you can enter into just a bad settlement, right? And so, you think that all the assets are disclosed or on the table, they're not. You enter into this bad agreement, and you're stuck again. You lose out on a lot of the assets that were part of the marital estate that you just were unaware of. Okay. And then in doing that, you're just going to lose out on long-term wealth. So again, once the divorce is finalized, if there's any problems, it's very hard to fix on the back end. Unfortunately, we get calls from folks all the time, sometimes the day after their divorce, and they discovered that things, were not done like they should have been done, and they're ready to relitigate. And as we tell them that, you're essentially going to pay a premium, and it's going to more than likely take as much time as it took the first go round, right? And so, as you can imagine, a lot of people don't want to hear that. So or are unhappy to receive that news. So do it right the first go round. All right, is always my advice. All right, so remember, if you have businesses, if you have investments, a lot of them, or any kind of real estate, if you have a high income, these are reasons to bring on counsel that is familiar with these types of divorces. You need an experienced attorney. There needs to be a legal strategy. If there are assets that are being hidden, to unearth those assets. And then there might need to be a financial investigation. Okay. And so that all comes with hiring the right law firm to, again, advocate for you. So bear that in mind. If you need us, we'd be more than happy to help you. If you are Georgia based, we travel all over the state. We have two offices. One is in Middle Georgia at 305 Pierce Avenue in Macon. The other is in Atlanta at 1201 West Peachtree. You can give us a call at 404 999 9529, or you can give us a call at 478-845-1213, or you can tap the link in our bio, and you can schedule yourself a consultation. We also have some great resources that are available on Amazon. Here is one of them, since we're mentioning divorce today: Divorce Death by a Thousand Cuts. We talk about a lot that is covered in most divorces here in this book. Do check it out. We don't cover as much as about hidden assets, what we discussed today, hiding assets. But again, if you have a situation where you believe that your spouse, you're going through a divorce or anticipating going through a divorce, you need counsel, you believe your spouse might be engaged in hiding assets, you're going to want a law firm, you're going to want attorneys that are familiar with that terrain. Okay. And that is going to be the Shakhan and Wilkerson Law Firm. So check these books out. They are available on Amazon for purchase. You can also go to the link in our bio if you're going through a divorce. We also have some free resources if you're going through divorce, things that you need to think about, as you kind of prepare for litigation. Okay. All right. It has been a pleasure talking to you. Make sure you like, follow, share this video with a family member or friend that is going through a divorce. Also, stay tuned for more videos. Make sure you go to our Instagram or Facebook page. We post a lot of great information, or TikTok, great information about divorce, family law, as well as criminal defense. All right. Give us a call if we can help you out. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.